tell us a little bit about what the company does, maybe even a little bit about how that's evolved, and particularly, how it's evolved lately.
Oh, sure, especially given what I do. Today, we have kind of two branches, if you can think of it that way. The original concept was, if you call me a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant, I will probably disconnect from this call. Because I always saw myself as a consultant who was in the business of helping organizations really understand, what are we talking about when we talk about diversity, equity, and what we now call equity and inclusion. But again, I have to go back a little bit. If you can think back 30 plus years ago, the language was very different. And to your point, in those days, it was helping organizations understand that this was not about legal compliance. This was not about, there's a place for that. There are things you just have to do if you're a citizen. But it really was about talent. There was a study that came out, I think it was called Workforce 2000. I know it was called Workforce 2000. I think it came out in 1987. But basically, it was a Census Bureau-based study that showed that the workplace would look very, very different. And they were talking about 2000, and it happened a little bit faster, okay? So in the early days, it was what I would call DEI 101. What is diversity? Why does it matter? Why should it matter to you? And so forth and so on. Later, about 10 years of doing some serious training, and I think we had an impact. We actually had 2 courses in the curriculum of the largest telecommunications company in the world. So we had impact. But as I began to really look at where do you want to have impact, all of it was about changing game. I call it changing the game. And so we started working with a model of mindset and behaviors. Some people call it head, heart, and hands. I don't personally believe that you can script these things. And I am so done with politically correct. I mean, it just makes smoke come out of my ears. It really, really does, okay? So then for the second 10 years, we were working more at strategic change. And very often that would start with, classic strategies, some assessment of the current state, some vision of what would be the ideal, and then how do you close the gap? So while we still did education during those years, we were looking more at tapping into the thinking of people who actually shape the culture. And that was often leaders, executive leaders, as well as managers, down to kind of mid-level management. And I think did a lot of good work there in what in my field is called large systems change. My goal is to move the whole culture. Well, if you can't roll forward a few more years, I realized, it's funny how epiphanies come, Rob. Literally, I ran into a client on the street and she said, Olivet, good to see you. You did such great work for us. And then it kind of fell off. And I said, why? She said, because we didn't know how to take it to the next level. So me with my lightning fast mind said, executive coaching. But at that time, the only pathway into coaching really was a PhD in organizational psychology or industrial psychology. And I didn't want to invest the time. And I didn't want to learn a bunch of things like statistics that I would never care about. But I just kept my ear out. And then one day, I connected with someone who's now a friend. And I think she gave me the courtesy interview simply because someone else had connected us. She said, I'll be in Chicago for 15 minutes. I can give you 15 minutes. Well, 2.5 hours later, we were walking down the street eating popcorn. If you know Chicago, you know you got to go to Garrett's Popcorn. And she invited me to be part of a coaching cadre that was being put together for a global professional services firm. I sort of hop-skipped through all the hard stuff. So I did that for a while, and this is getting to your point in the last few years. I did that for a while.
How long ago was that?
Oh, that was probably about 10 years ago now.
Gotcha.
And then later decided at the very strong impetus from a corporate client to get my certification. So I have all kinds of certifications in coaching. But how that relates to the more recent years, you know, we're coming out of the pandemic, May 2020, George Floyd, and all that has transpired since then. The pivotal moment for me was thinking about, where do I really want to have impact? And my space is the corporate space. And I just had decided, I was thinking about it, kind of running in the background, but I decided that where we're really going to focus is what I call organizational coaching and transformation, which simply means we'll work with the system side, your people systems, how you hire people, how you develop people, how you grow people. But I really want to get into people's heads. And that's the work that we've been doing a lot of lately, to help them unpack three things. Number one, what do you really think about difference? You know, because we all know the right things to say now. And difference is really about various elements of identity group. Some of those identity factors are core, kind of my earth suit, how I came here. Some get layered on as we move through life. We pick it up from our family, from whatever societal elements that impacted us as we matured. And then finally, the work piece for most of us, who, whatever your work may be. But when you really think about it, Rob, that's a lot of permutations of things that influence how we think. And I realize that many people don't think about how they think. They just kind of bounce along doing what they've always done. So that head piece is something I have really been double downing on for the last 2 years. And I was very blessed. Again, I had the opportunity to put together, I call it an executive development DEI leadership. It's a 1-year system. And I worked with one organization for, I think we actually, before it was all over, we took 250 some people through some version of it, either the long version, the medium version, or the short version. And then my oldest client that I've worked with for 20 years, last year we ran it with their top 20, and it is a game changer. Because it's not just like, do these 3 things and don't do these 4 things. We turn these folks inside out. Now, the funny thing about me is I seem to have a particular propensity for working well with white men, go figure. And many of my clients, especially at the senior level, sit in that space. So that's the work that we're doing now. When all that happened, if I were home in Chicago, I have a whiteboard in my kind of my little area, my study, if you want to call it that. And I wrote so I wouldn't forget it. 2022, where do we go from here? Because my feeling was, with all the tragedy that happened to Mr. Floyd, had it not been for the pandemic, that whole incident would have been just a news cycle, because it happens every day. What was different about that is that it happened on national television while we were all, you know, just hunkered down and wherever, and you were watching it over and over and over again. Kind of like the influence that the television had on the civil rights movement back in the 60s. Had it not been on camera, folks from the Northeast and other parts of the country would never have known just how horrible that whole thing was. And my concern in the DEI space is if it's just going to be reactionary, and I want to be very careful here because people have strong opinions. Some people might say, well, whatever it took to get us to this point, I can respect that. But I want to know what these companies are going to be doing 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. So if I look at it through my business side, talent comes in many packages. It's just stupid not to be effective. I don't worry about, to be effective. And then if I look at it through my human side, I personally believe that human beings are God's greatest design. So who died and gave you, not you, but the hypothetical you, the right to mistreat, diminish, all that ugly stuff, anybody? And so you can see I'm pretty passionate about it.
Yes.
And that is where my work is centering now, is working with those who are ready to do the work.